The distant sounds of explosions echoed through the ruins of Cyril, once a thriving city on the planet Kyrax. Human surgeon Ethan Cross moved with precision through the devastated streets, his mind solely focused on the mission. As a member of the elite Earth Special Forces, his team had been dispatched to aid the Kyraxians in their fight against a relentless enemy, the Drakor. For weeks, battles raged, leaving the city in tatters and the people desperate for survival. Ethan crouched behind the remnants of a collapsed building, scanning the area for any signs of movement. His suit's sensors detected life beneath the rubble, faint but present. He took a deep breath and approached cautiously. The war-torn landscape made every step uncertain. Debris shifted and creaked under his weight, but the training in his body kept him steady. Suddenly, a weak groan came from under a pile of debris, drawing his attention. He rushed to the source, disregarding the crackling energy weapons firing in the distance. As he began pulling away chunks of broken stone and metal, he uncovered a figure clad in ornate, battle-worn armor. Her skin was a soft shade of purple, her face marred by bruises and dirt. It was Princess Ilara, the daughter of Kyrax's ruling monarch, known across the galaxy for her unyielding bravery. "Stay with me," Ethan urged as he carefully removed the remaining rubble trapping her. Ilara's eyes flickered open, her once fierce gaze now weakened but filled with determination. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't talk," Ethan replied, his focus sharp as he lifted her to her feet. "We need to get you out of here." As they moved towards a safer spot in the midst of the chaos, Ethan noticed her injuries were worse than he had initially thought. Blood seeped through her armor, and her movements were sluggish. Still, she clung to him, her grip strong despite her weakening state. Ethan guided Princess Ilara into a small, abandoned shelter. The war raged outside, but inside the crumbling walls, they had a brief moment of respite. Ethan worked quickly, applying first aid to her wounds with the limited supplies he carried. His hands moved with precision, but his mind raced. Saving a royal alien princess was not part of the plan. "You didn't have to risk yourself for me," Ilara said, her voice stronger now, but still laced with pain. "I couldn't just leave you," Ethan responded. "It's not who I am." Ilara stared at him, her piercing violet eyes locking onto his. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the distant hum of energy weapons outside. She seemed to be calculating something, considering him in a way that made Ethan feel uneasy. "You are different from the others," she said finally. "Most would have seen me as an alien, not worth the trouble." "Doesn't matter to me," Ethan replied, standing up and checking the perimeter. "You're a person in need, that's all." Ilara's lips curved into a faint smile, despite the pain she was in. "You humans are truly strange, but perhaps that is why you are so powerful." Ethan didn't respond, focusing instead on the situation outside. The war wasn't over, and extraction was still a long way off. He needed to keep her safe, but something about the intensity of her gaze made him feel like his mission was about to become much more complicated. Hours passed, and the situation outside the shelter had calmed slightly, but tensions remained high. As Ethan and Ilara sat in the cold, dimly lit room, she broke the silence with a statement that shocked him to his core. "Marry me," she said, her voice steady and serious. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Excuse me." "You saved my life," Ilara explained, sitting up straighter despite the pain that crossed her face. "In Kyraxian culture, a life debt is sacred. The only way I can truly repay you is by binding our lives together." Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline or the sheer absurdity of what she was saying. "Princess, I didn't save you because I wanted anything in return, especially not marriage. I did it because it was the right thing to do." "That is precisely why I ask," Ilara replied, her expression resolute. "You acted selflessly. You didn't see me as a prize or a tool in this war. You saw me as a person." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but her intense gaze stopped him. She wasn't joking. This was a serious proposal, one that carried more weight than he could fully comprehend at the moment. He had entered this battle as a soldier, but now he was being thrust into something far more complex. "I don't think your people would approve of this," Ethan said, trying to deflect the situation. "Your father, my father, will understand," Ilara interrupted, her voice firm. "He will honor my decision because I am the heir, and my choice will bring stability." Ethan stood up, pacing the room. He hadn't expected this, not at all. Marrying an alien princess. He had just wanted to survive this war, not get involved in galactic politics. But as he looked back at Ilara, her determination unwavering, he realized that there was more to this than just cultural tradition. There was something unspoken between them, a connection formed in the chaos of war, and despite his instincts telling him to walk away, he couldn't deny it. "All right," Ethan finally said, his voice low. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." Ilara smiled, a genuine smile filled with relief. "Thank you, Sergeant. You have no idea how much this means to my people, and to me." Ethan sighed, realizing that his life had just taken a turn he could never have predicted. This wasn't just a mission anymore. His actions had set him on a path that would change not only his life, but the future of human-alien relations forever. Ethan's mind raced, trying to grasp the full weight of the decision he had just made. He looked at Ilara, her violet eyes glowing with gratitude, and something deeper, something more personal. The air between them felt thick with unspoken understanding, yet the enormity of what he'd agreed to still hung heavily in the air. "You're serious about this?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but inside, his thoughts swirled. "More serious than you know," Ilara responded, her tone soft but unwavering. "This union will not only honor the Caraxian life debt tradition, but will also serve as a powerful symbol to our people. It will show them that humans and Caraxians can trust one another, even in the darkest of times." Ethan let out a slow breath. He hadn't signed up for diplomacy or to become a symbol of interspecies unity. He was a soldier, not a politician or a diplomat. His mission had been simple: fight the Drak Corps, protect the civilians, and survive. "And what if I say I changed my mind?" Ethan asked, crossing his arms. He wasn't trying to back out, but he needed to understand all the consequences. Ilara's expression softened as she stood and moved closer to him. "You have the right to refuse, Sergeant. I would never force you into anything you didn't truly want. But if you go through with this, your life will change in ways you can't yet imagine. You will be honored among my people, respected, perhaps even feared for your strength and courage." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "And you would also be bound to me, not just by tradition, but by the responsibility to my people and their future." Ethan looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. He saw the weight of her words reflected in her gaze. This was more than just a cultural obligation. It was a partnership that went beyond the battlefield. And yet, the gravity of their situation was undeniable. They were still in the middle of a war zone. And this wasn't the time for romantic notions or grand political moves. "We need to focus on surviving this first," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Let's get out of here, regroup with my team, and then we can talk about whatever comes next." Ilara nodded, a look of determination crossing her face. "You're right. There's still a war to win." Part 5. Back into the fight. With the decision hanging between them, Ethan and Ilara prepared to leave the safety of the shelter. The sounds of distant gunfire and explosions reminded them that the war was far from over. Ethan checked his weapon and activated his helmet's visor, scanning the surroundings for any movement. "Stay close," he said, motioning for Ilara to follow as they slipped through the shattered doorway and into the wrecked streets of Exerol once more. The city was eerily quiet now, the lull between battles providing a brief respite. Ethan moved with caution, his senses heightened, every shadow and flicker of light putting him on edge. Ilara followed close behind, her steps silent, a testament to her own training and resilience. As they navigated through the ruined buildings, Ethan's comm unit crackled to life. "Sergeant Cross, this is command. Do you copy?" Ethan pressed a hand to his earpiece, relieved to hear the familiar voice of his team leader. "Copy, command. I've got the princess with me. Requesting immediate extraction." "Roger that, Sergeant. Extraction point is 10 clicks northeast of your position. Drac Corps forces are regrouping. Expect resistance on the way out." "Understood," Ethan replied, glancing at Ilara. "We've got a long way to go." Ilara met his gaze, her expression calm but determined. "I'm ready." They moved quickly but carefully, making their way toward the extraction point. The streets were littered with debris, remnants of the fierce battle that had torn through the city. As they rounded a corner, Ethan's instincts flared. He raised his hand, signaling Ilara to stop. Ahead, Drac Corps soldiers were patrolling the area, their hulking forms moving with a predatory grace. Their reptilian features were unmistakable. Red scales, sharp claws, and glowing eyes that pierced through the dust-filled air. Ethan gestured for Ilara to stay low as he readied his rifle. The odds weren't great, but they had no other choice. If they were spotted, they wouldn't stand a chance. "Stay behind me," Ethan whispered as he took aim, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The first shot rang out, hitting the lead Drac Corps soldier square in the chest. The alien let out a guttural roar before collapsing to the ground. The other soldiers reacted immediately, their weapons firing at Ethan's position. Ethan moved swiftly, returning fire as he ducked behind a crumbling wall. He could feel the heat of the plasma shots as they whizzed past, narrowly missing him. Ilara stayed low, her eyes scanning the battlefield for an opening. "We need to move," Ethan shouted over the sound of gunfire. "We're sitting ducks here." Ilara nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll cover you. Go." Before Ethan could argue, Ilara picked up a discarded energy weapon from the ground and began firing at the Drac Corps soldiers. Her shots were precise, her movements fluid despite her injuries. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the open street, using the cover of Ilara's fire to move closer to the enemy. With a quick, practiced motion, he lobbed a grenade into their midst. The explosion sent debris flying, and the remaining soldiers were thrown off balance. "Now," Ethan called out to Ilara, motioning for her to follow. They ran together, their hearts pounding as they raced through the streets, leaving the chaos behind. The extraction point was still several clicks away, but they had made it through the first wave of resistance. As they moved deeper into the city, Ethan glanced at Ilara, impressed by her skill and courage. Despite everything, she had fought alongside him without hesitation. Maybe this partnership wasn't as impossible as he had thought. "You're full of surprises, Princess," Ethan said with a grin, his voice laced with admiration. Ilara smirked, her eyes glinting with the same fierce determination. "And there's more where that came from, Sergeant. Let's win this war first. Then we'll talk about the future." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. Whatever came next, they would face it together, on the battlefield and beyond. Ethan and Ilara moved swiftly through the war-torn streets, the extraction point looming closer with each step. The adrenaline pumping through their veins dulled the aches in their bodies and the exhaustion in their minds. They had survived another skirmish, but they both knew the Drac Corps wouldn't give up so easily. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, checking the coordinates on his visor. "We just need to hold on a little longer." Ilara nodded, keeping her weapon at the ready. Despite her royal status, she carried herself like a soldier, focused, alert, and prepared for whatever came next. Ethan had seen plenty of warriors crack under pressure, but Ilara had more grit than most soldiers he knew. She wasn't just a symbol, she was a fighter. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed through the rubble-strewn streets. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, signaling for Ilara to halt. The sound was low, almost imperceptible, like the soft hum of machinery. Ethan's gut told him something was wrong. Before he could react, The ground beneath them trembled. A section of the road ahead collapsed, revealing the hidden tunnel. From the shadows, more Drakor soldiers emerged, larger, armored, and more heavily armed than the ones they had encountered before. These weren't just foot soldiers. They were elite warriors, and they had been waiting for them. Ambush, Ethan shouted, diving behind a nearby wreckage just as a barrage of plasma fire rained down on them. Ilara followed suit, taking cover behind a fallen pillar. They must have known we'd come this way. She yelled over the sound of explosions. Looks like it, Ethan growled, returning fire. But there were too many of them, and their position was too exposed. They couldn't stay there long without getting overwhelmed. We can't win this fight head-on, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. We need to outsmart them. Ethan's mind raced. They had to get to the extraction point, but fighting their way through the elite Drakor soldiers was suicide. His eyes darted around the crumbling landscape, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. That's when he saw it, a collapsed building with a weakened structure just above the tunnel entrance where the Drakor soldiers had emerged. If they could bring it down. Ilara, do you see that building? Ethan pointed toward the crumbling remains. If we can bring it down, we can seal off the tunnel and cut off their reinforcements. Ilara's eyes followed his gaze, and she nodded quickly. But how? Ethan gritted his teeth. We'll have to get close enough to plant a charge. Ilara's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was no princess, no sergeant, just two warriors willing to risk everything. She gave him a sharp nod, her resolve clear. I'll draw their fire, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. No, you'll get yourself killed, Ethan protested, but Ilara had already stood up, firing wildly at the Drakor soldiers, pulling their attention away from him. Ethan cursed under his breath but knew there was no time to argue. With the enemy distracted, he sprinted toward the fallen building, weaving through the debris as plasma shots scorched the air around him. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained focused. He couldn't let Ilara's risk be in vain. As he reached the base of the building, Ethan quickly set the explosive charge, his hands moving swiftly through the familiar motions. Once the timer was set, he pressed himself against the wall, counting down the seconds. Now, he shouted into his comm, signaling Ilara. In perfect synchronization, Ilara dove for cover just as Ethan detonated the charge. The explosion rippled through the air, shaking the ground beneath them as the weakened structure collapsed in on itself. Dust and debris filled the streets, and the entrance to the tunnel was buried under tons of rubble. For a few moments, there was only silence. The Drakor forces that had been pouring out of the tunnel were now trapped beneath the wreckage. The tide had turned in their favor. Ethan emerged from cover, coughing through the dust, but a grim smile tugged at his lips. We did it. Ilara stood up, brushing off the debris from her armor. She looked at Ethan, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. That was close. Ethan walked over to her, giving a nod of respect. You were reckless, but it worked. I knew you'd pull it off, Ilara replied, her voice softening. And besides, you're not the only one willing to take risks. For a moment, they stood there, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle, the weight of their shared experience settling in. The war still raged on around them, but in that brief moment of calm, something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged in the fires of combat, deeper than any royal decree or soldier's duty. We still need to get to the extraction point, Ethan reminded her, though his tone was less urgent now. The worst of the immediate danger had passed, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Ilara nodded, her expression more somber now. Lead the way, Sergeant. As they moved toward the extraction point, Ethan's thoughts wandered to the future. His agreement to marry Ilara still loomed over him, a decision that would shape the course of not only their lives, but perhaps the future of both their peoples. He had saved her, yes, but now they were bound by something far greater than duty or tradition. And yet, despite the uncertainty, Ethan found himself not regretting the choice. The connection between them, born in the crucible of battle, was real. They had fought side by side, risked everything for each other, and come out stronger. Whatever the future held, Ethan knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. The extraction point was just ahead. Ethan and Ilara could hear the low hum of the dropship's engines as they neared the clearing, where their ride out of the war zone awaited. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, the recent ambush and the collapsed building marking the end of the Drakkor's immediate assault. But Ethan knew that peace on a battlefield was always temporary. "Stay sharp," Ethan muttered, scanning the area. "We're not safe until we're on that ship." Ilara, her weapon still at the ready, nodded in agreement. They both moved cautiously toward the ship, keeping their senses alert for any sign of danger. But the landing zone appeared secure, and as they approached the dropship's ramp, a sense of relief finally began to settle over them. The ship's pilot, a grizzled human veteran, gave a nod from the cockpit. "Sergeant, Princess, we've got orders to take you straight to the capital. The king is waiting for you both." Ethan felt a weight in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been trying to push from his mind ever since he agreed to marry Ilara. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was about to step into a whole new world of politics, diplomacy, and responsibility, all bound to a future he still couldn't fully grasp. As they boarded the ship and took their seats, Ethan glanced at Ilara, who sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, her mind clearly occupied by thoughts of what awaited them at the Caraxian capital. "I still don't know if this is the right thing," Ethan finally said, breaking the silence. "Marrying you, it feels like more than I signed up for. What if I'm not the kind of leader your people need?" Ilara looked at him, her eyes softening. "Ethan, I didn't choose you because I needed a leader. I chose you because you showed me something I hadn't seen in any other being, not even among my own people." "What's that?" Ethan asked, feeling a lump in his throat. "Integrity," Ilara replied. "You acted out of selflessness when you saved me. You didn't seek power, glory, or reward. You did it because it was right, and that is exactly the kind of person my people need. Not a conqueror or a ruler, but someone who understands what it means to fight for others." Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor. He had been a soldier for so long, and yet the simplicity of her words struck something deep inside him. He wasn't just a fighter. He was someone who cared about people, no matter where they came from. Perhaps that was why he had survived for so long in this war, because he never lost sight of what was important. "Maybe," Ethan said softly, "but I'm still just one man." Ilara smiled, her eyes bright with determination. "One man can change everything. You already have." Before Ethan could respond, the dropship jolted as it ascended into the sky, leaving the ruined city below. Through the viewport, the once glistening capital of Kyrax loomed on the horizon, a mix of towering spires and ancient stone structures. The palace, where King Thelor awaited them, stood at the heart of the city, a symbol of Caraxian power and tradition. As the ship approached the landing pad, a large contingent of Caraxian soldiers and officials gathered below, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. Among them was King Thelor, his imposing figure unmistakable. Despite the weight of the situation, Ethan couldn't help but notice the regal air about him, a leader who commanded respect without needing to demand it. The ship touched down gently, and as the ramp lowered, Ilara and Ethan stepped out together, side by side. The eyes of the entire Caraxian delegation were upon them, and Ethan could feel the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a meeting between a soldier and a king. It was the beginning of something far larger than himself. King Thelor approached, his face a stoic mask, but his eyes revealed a depth of emotion. He first looked to his daughter, who nodded subtly, before turning to Ethan. "You are the human who saved my daughter's life," the king said, his voice deep and resonant. "For that, you have my eternal gratitude." Ethan bowed slightly. "I was just doing my duty, Your Majesty." King Thaler's gaze shifted to his daughter, and for a moment there was silence, as if an unspoken conversation passed between them. Then the king's expression softened, and he extended a hand toward Ithan. "I understand you have agreed to marry my daughter, and by doing so, you will honor a Caraxian life debt. This is no small thing, Sergeant Ethan Valen. You are about to become part of our royal family, and with it comes great responsibility." Ethan looked at the king's outstretched hand, then back at Elara, who watched him with unwavering trust in her eyes. He knew this wasn't just about fulfilling a life debt. This was about forging a new alliance, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and the hope for a future where humans and Caraxians could stand together. "I accept that responsibility, Your Majesty," Ethan said, clasping the king's hand, "for the sake of both our peoples." The king smiled for the first time, a rare expression of warmth. "Then let it be known, this union will not just bind two lives, but will strengthen the bond between our worlds. Together, we will face the challenges ahead, united." As the Caraxian delegation cheered in approval, Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was about to become a symbol of hope and unity, a bridge between two civilizations. Elara stepped closer to him, her hand brushing against his. "You've changed everything, Ethan," she whispered, a soft smile on her lips. Ethan looked out at the gathered crowd, then back at Elara. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but we'll face it together." And as they stood side by side, their fates intertwined, Ethan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether in battle or in peace, they would face them not as enemies, but as partners. The war wasn't over, but a new chapter had begun.